The United States title has had quite a history. After all, this is the same belt that John Cena once so memorably elevated with his weekly Open Challenge, and it's also the same belt that Booker T and Chris Benoit fought over in a best-of-7 series back on 2006 SmackDown. But not all title reigns are created equal. No, some are just outright terrible and do nothing but devalue the belt. But what are the worst of these in WWE history? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today. And where better to start than with the time Dean Ambrose won it in the spring of 2013. Of course, the problem here wasn't that he had snagged the secondary prize. No, he was already a superstar in the making at this point, and so him holding on to it for almost a full year between May of 2013 and May of 2014 should have been enough to elevate it somewhat. The only issue was that Ambrose never really defended the belt. Yes, while his Shield stablemates Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins would frequently put their tag team titles on the line, the Lunatic Fringe seemed to forget he had his own belt at some point, and that was why he barely ever got around to putting it up for grabs in a match. Seriously, over the 351 days he would be champion, he defended it a total of 7 times on TV, an achievement that would make even the current-day tribal chief look up and tell his old friend that he needed to come to work occasionally. Sure, it was regularly defended on the house show circuit during this time, but that's never really been part of the on-screen canon in WWE. So that means that what we're left with was a situation where one of the hottest young rising stars in the industry had a belt around his waist he could have really done something with, but due to questionable booking of said belt, the whole thing ended up going nowhere. Hell, even when he lost the title, no one would get the rub of beating him, as it happened in a battle royal designed to screw Ambrose after he and the rest of the Shield had turned on the Authority. So in the end, this has to rank as one of the worst US title reigns, if for no other reason than it was so uneventful. But Mox isn't the only man who won this particular piece of hardware and then proceeded to do nothing with it, because back in 2010, the same thing had happened with Bret Hart. Of course, in the Hitman's case, it wasn't as if he could do anything even if he wanted to though, as he was by this point long beyond ever getting cleared to wrestle in an actual match. So how did he win the belt in the first place then? Well, that all happened on the May 17th episode of Raw that year, when in a surprise for the crowd in attendance, Bret was announced as the next challenger to The Miz, the man who was then in possession of the gold. And what followed after that was supposed to be a nice feel-good moment which would see the excellence of execution defeat the champ in short order and prove that he still had it. The only problem was that he didn't still have it. And this was why he couldn't actually take any bumps or perform any moves outside of some punches and a sharpshooter, with it being that which ultimately got him the submission victory. Needless to say then, once the excitement of him getting the win had faded and people realized Bret Hart in 2010 was now US champion, it started to become clear how much of a mistake this may have been, as not only was The Miz made to look like a fool, but the title had been devalued somewhat as well on account of the fact that a no longer active performer with post-concussion syndrome was able to beat the champion with ease. And what's worse, Bret couldn't even defend the belt going forward for obvious reasons. So rather than be able to put someone else over and make the whole thing worthwhile, he was instead forced to vacate the following week on Raw and announce a match which would see a new champion be crowned, a match that was eventually won by R-Truth. And as it happened, that's exactly who we want to talk about next, though it's not this particular reign we have an issue with. No, instead, when we talk about everyone's favorite Ron Killings, it's the time he became US champion in 2019. Why this reign in particular? Well, at least back in 2010, R-Truth still had some semblance of legitimacy to him, but come the end of the decade, it was clear what his role was, and that was as a comedy act. And look, there's nothing wrong with comedy acts in wrestling. They make up some of the most entertaining performers, in fact. Names like Maximum Male Models and Santino Marella. But said acts have a place on the card, and it really shouldn't be clogging up the title scene. No, when someone like R-Truth wins the United States strap in 2019, long after the point he was being taken seriously as a legitimate threat, it tells the audience that the belt is a joke too. And if the belt is a joke, why should we care about watching people fight over it? And to make matters worse, the man Ron Killings beat to win this gold was none other than Shinsuke Nakamura, someone who should have been a perfect person to run as champion back then, as well, he wasn't the same performer he had been back during his days of his IWGP Intercontinental title run in Japan. He was still more than capable of having some hard-hitting bouts and bringing some credibility back to the proceedings. But in 2019, credibility wasn't something WWE were concerned with. And so that was why we had the King of Strong Styles reign be aborted before its time so that R-Truth could have some laughs. And again, this is not a shot at R-Truth. No, we love him as much as the next person, but come on, he has his role, and that role is as a comedy side character, something he's playing to perfection right now as the on and off again member of the Judgment Day. So please, no more belts for him in the future or for comedy acts in general. After all, it's the same reason our next entry has been included in this video, and that's Santino Marella. Yes, Santino is awesome in the sense that he's one of the most legitimately funny wrestlers in WWE history. Hell, he's one of the most legitimately funny wrestlers in the industry's history, in fact. But like with R-Truth, that comedy has a role on the card, and it's not hogging up title scenes. No, it's doing things like having tea parties with Sheamus, or getting into sock puppet wars with Mick Foley. So why WWE thought it was a good idea to further devalue the United States Championship by giving it to the Kayfabe Battalion in 2012 then is anyone's guess, as he was doing just fine without it, and the title would have been doing a lot better without him. Seriously, this was a period where, for as bad as the booking could be in WWE, you at least had the potential of an absolutely stacked mid-card to fight over this prize. Hell, you had names like Cesaro, Cody Rhodes, and Drew McIntyre. So there was no excuse for choosing to instead turn the belt into a joke by having Santino hold it for a full 167 days. And again, we have to stress that like with our feelings on R-Truth, this is not a shot at Marella as he's undeniably awesome. All we're saying is that if we wanted to give performers like them belts back in the 2010s, then maybe we could have created a belt specifically for the purpose, something like the 24/7 title. After all, that piece of hardware was always a joke from day one, so no one batted an eyelid when Truth held it for a total of 54 times. And if it was around in 2012, then no one would have batted an eyelid if Santino Marella had held it dozens of times either. But it wasn't around, and so instead we got him as United States Champion for half a year, meaning that for half a year, that belt was about as worthless as the WWE Women's Tag Team titles are today. That said, it's not all Santino's fault that the US title was worthless in the 2010s, as there were other bad champions during this time period too. And one of them is the next person we're going to be looking at. Who might this be? Why, Alberto Del Rio, of course. That's right, while you might think that on the surface of things, having former two-time WWE champion Alberto Del Rio return to WWE in 2015 and win the secondary prize would be a great way to further elevate it following the excellent work John Cena had done with the gold, this turned out to be a disaster. Why was that? Well, first of all, it was actually Alberto who beat Cena for the strap at October 25th's Hell in a Cell in a quick throwaway bout that really didn't sell the magnitude of such a legendary reign coming to an end. No, all it told us was that Cena was injured, and so the company had to get the belt off him quickly without him having to have a proper match. And with the former CMLL and AAA World Champion being the one to defeat Big Match John here, it meant no young up-and-comer who could have benefited from getting the rub had the chance to do so. Still, this didn't necessarily mean Del Rio's title reign had to be a disaster going forward. No, even if it had started off weak, it could have still turned into something good as the weeks and months went on. But in the end, this didn't happen as, despite holding it for the next 3 months, he proceeded to do nothing with it, except at one point pass it back and forth between himself and someone else we'll get to in a moment. And so that was why, once he finally dropped it for good at the 2016 Royal Rumble, the belt was right back to the level it had been before Cena won it, and that was pretty much worthless. Yes, it's rare to see such good work be undone so quickly, but never doubt 2010's WWE's ability to turn treasure into trash. Of course, Alberto can't be entirely blamed for this though, as the man he passed the belt back and forth with also has to shoulder some of the blame for making the US title feel unimportant again. That's right, it's time to talk about Kalisto. Now, there are 2 Kalistos out there. And no, we don't mean that in a literal sense like we do with his Lucha Dragons partner Sin Cara. Rather, we mean it symbolically as, while he was wrestling down in Mexico for AAA as Samurai del Sol, Emmanuel Rodriguez was proving himself to be one of the best luchadors on the planet. And then there's the other side of the man, the side we got in WWE, named Kalisto. This man was a man who never was allowed to do what made him so special once inside of the WWE system, and so he quickly floundered with less than great matches and terrible promo segments, namely his Good Lucha Things interview. So it's just a shame that when he won the United States title from Alberto Del Rio in 2016 then, it was the latter version of the man we got. And that meant a reign so underwhelming that by the time it was over, people were begging for the strap to be given back to Rusev. Seriously, almost nothing of note would happen during the time Kalisto was champion, and because of that, not only was the belt further damaged, but his career trajectory was severely damaged in the process. Hell, whereas there was still a possibility WWE might have seen the Chicago native as a future player back then, after his failed run as US champion, there was no hope of him going any higher up the pecking order ever again. So maybe that was why, once he dropped it, he'd spend the rest of his time in the company either stuck in 205 Live purgatory with the Cruiserweight title, or working as part of a go-nowhere trio alongside Gran Metalik and Lince Dorado called the Lucha House Party. Yes, this was a title reign so damaging it killed any main event aspirations Kalisto may have had. And it also killed the credibility of the belt so much that even when the likes of Roman Reigns, Chris Jericho, and Kevin Owens won it not long thereafter, it still felt very much secondary in its nature. But Kalisto's time spent devaluing the US title with Alberto Del Rio wasn't the only example of someone who had followed John Cena and then proceeded to fail to live up to what he'd built up. Because following one of Big Match John's early reigns with the prize back in 2005, the same thing would happen with Orlando Jordan. And for those who don't remember Orlando Jordan, we don't blame you, as he was just about as forgettable of an early 2000s SmackDown wrestler as someone could be. Sure, he featured somewhat prominently at one point when he became a member of JBL's cabinet, but even this wasn't enough to make him stand out. What his membership in this stable was enough to help him do, however, was get a shot at then United States champion John Cena. And the reason for this was because at that point in time, Cena was feuding with JBL and had eyes on his WWE strap. So hoping to get one over on his upcoming opponent then, Layfield hoped to kill his morale by having his lackey Jordan challenge Cena and defeat him to take away his gold. Would this happen? Of course it would. John had bigger fish to fry at that point. The only problem was that once he moved on to the WWE title, the man who took the secondary belt from him did absolutely nothing of note. Seriously, in the annals of United States champions, Orlando Jordan may very well rank as the most inconsequential of them all, as we can't think of a single noteworthy thing he achieved while holding it other than dumping the spinner version of it in the trash. And that's even worse when you consider the fact that his reign went on for 171 days, almost 6 full months of it pretty much not existing. Honestly, you would have probably done less damage if you'd just vacated the belt at this point and left it like that until Chris Benoit won it again in August of 2005, which, well, we suppose that reign would be best left considered vacant as well now. Maybe it would have been better if we just skipped both of those champions then and went straight to Booker T winning it from John Cena, as at least then we wouldn't have such a valley of insignificance and erasure from history in between. But that's not what we got. No, we got Orlando Jordan being put in the same category as former US champions like Harley Race, Terry Funk, and Ric Flair. And that's just not right by anyone's estimation. Still, at least it would never get worse than this, right? Well, while some may argue that's the case, there are others who would argue that our next subject was an even worse champion. Who are we talking about this time? Who else but Baron Corbin? Yes, Baron Corbin, a strong contender for worst United States champion ever. And the reason for this is because when he won it, it was at a point in his career when he was at his absolute nadir as a performer. Seriously, back in 2017, there were few people on the WWE roster that screamed Vince McMahon's idea of sports entertainment more than this Kansas native did. After all, he had all the qualities required for the role in that he was big and couldn't wrestle very well. And that was why the boss chose to go all in with him as his next star in waiting by having Corbin defeat Ty Dillinger and AJ Styles of all people at that October's Hell in a Cell pay-per-view to win the strap for the first time. No, you didn't hear us wrong. In a match that featured one of the greatest wrestlers of his generation, arguably one of the best of all time in fact, and another very solid hand in Shawn Spears, WWE chose to go with neither of them as champion and instead run with Baron Corbin. Still, it could have worked out if he had a decent run afterwards, right? Well, unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So for the next 70 days after that, we got Corbin working terrible matches against the likes of The Miz, all while fans slept through each encounter. Truly, this was the lowest points when it came to the state of the United States title, as it was so unimportant then, most fans would have actively been happy to see it removed from television. Hell, even when Dolph Ziggler won it from Baron at December 17, 2017's Clash of Champions pay-per-view, he couldn't revive its fortunes. No, it would continue to be a worthless prop all the way up until our next subject won it and carried on this lineage of awfulness. Yes, it's time for us to move on to Bobby Roode. Now, Bobby Roode is a very good wrestler, great even. And this is something which he's proven during his lengthy spell with TNA, where he became a 2-time world champion and 8-time tag team champion. Hell, even once he joined NXT in 2016, he found so much success there that before long he'd be dethroning Shinsuke Nakamura to win their top prize. That said, once he joined the main roster in 2017, all of his fortunes would change, as at that point he began being booked by Vince McMahon. And rather than see him as the potential main eventer he could have been, the boss decided to throw Roode in with the rest of the mid-card division instead. Of course, this instantly made the Canadian feel unimportant then. Unimportant enough to where once he won the vacant US strap on the January 16, 2018 episode of SmackDown, the victory was met with a series of mess from the audience in attendance. Sure, things might have improved for him had he been allowed to have a good run with this in order to reestablish both himself and the belt, but that sadly wouldn't be in the cards, as instead Roode would hold on to the title for the next 54 days, proceed to do absolutely nothing with it in the process, and then drop it to Randy Orton at March 11th's Fastlane. Yes, this was another example of a talented wrestler's attempts to bring some value back to the once prized gold be hampered by bad booking. Yes, it shouldn't have been difficult to have Bobby Roode do something good with the US title. All he had to do was go out there and be given time to have good matches each week, just like Gunther does with the Intercontinental belt today. And the former Beer Money Inc. member isn't the only person who could have added a lot to the lineage of the secondary prize if he'd been allowed to when he'd won it. Sadly though, just as this wouldn't be the case for him, it also wouldn't be the case for Apollo Crews when he snagged the belt in 2020. That's right, it's hard to think of a time in recent history where WWE got such a talented star of the larger wrestling world and then proceeded to fail to get over in any way. After all, while he was working for places like Pro Wrestling Guerrilla and Dragon Gate back in the early to mid 2010s, Uhaa Nation was considered one of the fastest rising performers in the industry. It's such a shame then that once he joined WWE in 2015 and was there repackaged as Apollo Crews, he'd been given absolutely nothing to work with other than to be a guy who smiled a lot and occasionally did an athletic move. And this carried on all the way through his time in NXT and up to the main roster as it happened, with it being once he was on Raw and SmackDown that things reached an all-new level of bad at this point. That's right, after his call-up, Crews spent 4 years between 2016 and 2020 barely even appearing on TV. And whenever he did appear, he'd be part of comedy acts like Titus Worldwide, nothing which allowed him to show off his abilities as a wrestler. And that meant that once he was finally given a run with the US belt in May of 2020, no one cared about him anymore. And because of this, not many fans cared about the run which followed. Yes, throughout his reign, Crews would only work matches on Raw that went 5 minutes or less each week. Therefore, it didn't exactly do much to catch people's attention. So it should come as no surprise that this is another reign which has all but been forgotten about in the years since. But then we could say the same about all the reigns we've discussed today, as in their own way, they each represent the absolute bottom of the barrel.